Jaden Rashada, Florida's 2023 five-star quarterback signee, is still signed with the Gators and has not requested a release from the university. This, according to his father, who spoke with national recruiting analyst Brandon Huffman. Rashada is the number 6 quarterback in the 2023 class. He originally committed to Miami in the summer, then flipped to the Gators in November. He is not yet enrolled at the school. Now, for the latest on Rashada's recruitment, let's bring in Brandon Huffman. And Brandon, you've been speaking with Rashada's father. How did Florida and Jaden get into this situation?
Well, that's a great question, and one that I don't think that we're ever going to get the real answer to. But all we know is that a week ago, after he played in the Under Armour game in Orlando, he was supposed to head back to the West Coast, grab his stuff, and then head back to Florida. He is not in the Sunshine State. He is back in the Bay Area. And it sounds like there's still some layers here to this situation that need to get resolved if Jaden Rashada is going to eventually end up in Gainesville.
Huff, the spring semester at Florida began on Monday earlier this week. When does this situation need to be resolved by?
I think realistically it needs to be resolved by Friday at the latest, that he could start his classes on Monday in Gainesville. Now, one of the things with University of Florida is they started their classes on Monday, like you said. The last day for add and drop is this Friday, which is on tomorrow. So this needs to be resolved ASAP in order for him to enroll in time for this semester to be able to play during spring football. So that's why I think you're going to see some kind of resolution one way or the other over the next 24 hours, and we'll eventually know if Jaden Rashada ends up at Florida or if he's going to end up going through the recruiting process one more time.
Now, we know in modern day recruiting, there's just so many factors that can influence a recruit's decision. How much did NIL deals play a part in this?
Well, I think if you read all the reports, the NIL keeps popping up in it. And I'm sure that there are layers to it that NIL does have a factor in this and does have a presence in there. But that's one of those things where, nobody really truly knows. We don't know what goes on in the NIL. We see outlandish numbers being thrown out for every recruit. NIL has captivated the recruiting process and every layer of it. So I'm sure that NIL absolutely is factoring into this, but how much of that is, that's the question that we don't know. We know that there are reports that came up this summer when he initially committed to Miami. We know there are reports when he flipped to Florida that NIL was a big factor. So I'm imagining that NIL does have something to do with this, but to what level, to what layer, that is the great question. I think only the people that are really a part of this process are privy to know.
Yeah, like Grace mentioned, a lot of different factors when you think about recruitments. A lot of recruitments come down to relationships, Huff. What is the relationship like right now between Florida and Jaden Rashada?
Well, that's what Thursday was going to be big about. There was going to be a conversation that took place, according to Harlen Rashada, with the University of Florida and with the Rashada family. And now it's going to be, is this relationship repairable? Is it not? Is it irreparable? That is going to, again, be established in that conversation on Thursday. Is it too little, too late? Is it something that's salvageable? Again, that's why that call is going to be so key, and that's why I think we will have some kind of resolution by Friday, one way or the other. But when people that are involved in this start leaking information and sources are indicating, and then stories start getting built, and then people have to go on the record to address that, that tells me that there might be some, a little bit of a gap that's being created in the relationship. And so that's why that conversation on Thursday is so important, not just to the University of Florida, not just to Rashada, but maybe some of those other schools that are keeping an eye on, seeing how they may be affected by this.
Well, Rashada's recruitment has been anything but a straight line. He decommitted from Miami. Now his status with Florida is uncertain. So what's next for the QB?
That is a great question. And again, I think that by the end of the week on Friday, we will know what the next step is. It's either go move your stuff, get down to Gainesville, get into class, get acclimated with your new program, or it may be back to the drawing board, back to square one. Being that he signed a national letter of intent in December, he would need, if this relationship is irreparable, he would need to get released from his NLI. If he doesn't get out of his NLI, then maybe he has to use a transfer already. We've seen it's not uncommon, even in the era of the one-year transfer. A year ago, Jeremy Bernard was committed and signed to the University of Washington, been committed for almost 2 years. He was scheduled to start classes on January 2nd. On January 3rd. On January 2nd, Junior Adams announced that he was leaving Washington to go to Oregon because Jeremy never enrolled at Washington. He was let out of his NLI by the University of Washington, went to Michigan State, and then ultimately went into the portal and transferred. If Jaden is not released from his NLI, he has to play at the University of Florida, then he perhaps would have to use a transfer, the one-time transfer right now. So that's what the next step is going to be. If this thing does not get resolved, does he end up asking out of his NLI, which would be the next step for him to end up at a new place? Does he wait until the summer to end up somewhere? Does he go somewhere that maybe is on the quarter system, where he could start in March or April? Does he go to another school that's on the semester system and miss a week and a half? There's, again, so many layers, and it's all dependent on how that conversation on Thursday goes.
Yeah, Huff, let's take a step back and look at this from a holistic standpoint. And considering this situation with Florida and Jaden Rashada, and given that we had already crossed the finish line, per se, when he put pen to paper, what does the future of NIL look like in recruiting?
Well, one thing is for sure, it's going to continue to have a presence in recruiting, and it's going to have a kind of take on a life of its own. I mean, you go back to when the first kind of word came out back in the spring about the first quarterback who was tied to a big money NIL deal, and how everything kind of just evolved and erupted, coming off the heels of a 2022 cycle where it was the first year where NIL was a factor, but now you're seeing quarterbacks getting more involved, where quarterbacks that committed earlier in the process to kind of be the Pied Piper, if you will, for recruiting class, now they're holding out a little bit longer, and NIL is definitely having an impact on quarterback recruiting at all positions. So, eventually we're going to come to a point where the NCAA is going to try to do whatever they can to get the toothpaste back in the tube. But I think at this point, there's toothpaste all over the sink everywhere, and it's impossible to clean this mess up. And there really is not going to be any resolution or change to it if it doesn't get nipped in the bud this quickly. So it's clear that NIL is becoming at the forefront. You're hearing every college coach in the country either say, hey, yeah, you're absolutely right, we used NIL to sign this class, or other schools say, no, we're doing it this way, or other schools using it to address their own boosters, but making it look like they're blaming somebody else as a call to arms. However, coaches are using NIL in their recruiting process. It's not going anywhere, guys, and I think it's only going to continue to become more prominent unless the NCAA, and save the chuckles and the LOLs, but unless the NCAA can figure out a way to stop it, I don't see it slowing down anytime.
A messy situation, and one that we will be watching closely. Thanks for joining us, Huff. Appreciate you. And for the latest updates on Rashada's recruitment, stay tuned to swamp247.com.